What are some of the key lessons you learned that you would like to share with future diplomats?
Well, I had an amazing 30-year career, and I have no complaints about it. In fact, it was a wonderful learning experience, which was what I hoped it would be, not only in terms of foreign languages and cultures, but how to solve or at least finesse problems. Everywhere I served, I learned the local language, in part just for situational awareness. When you're sitting across the table from someone, you kind of like to know when they're talking to their colleagues, whether they're planning how to cut you up into small pieces or whether they are talking about how to engage you. It's also very useful to be able to eavesdrop on side conversations. When I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia, I was able to understand King Fahd and his staff discussions when he would seek advice in the course of a conversation. He didn't realize I spoke Arabic, and until one day he asked me a question. I made the mistake of not waiting for the interpreter answering it. So I think situational awareness is a good thing, worth investing in, and more than that, I learned a lot of other things. The best contributions I think I learned I could make in my reporting and analysis, which is a large part of diplomatic work, was that I should write not to a general audience, but to specific individuals. And I should try to help correct their stereotypes, which got in the way of their understanding the actual circumstances we were dealing with. And I should try to cause them to question the thoughtless narratives that tend to dominate policy discussions in our capital, like others, and thereby guide policy decisions. So I learned to write in a way that I never would have learned if I had not had that experience. I also learned to control myself, to put the interests of the United States ahead of my own emotional reaction to things. Lots of times I was engaged in discussions, delivering protests, démarches, in circumstances where what the other side believed or said was deeply offensive or challenging to me. And I learned that indignation, unless it's purposeful, it's an old saying that diplomats never insult anyone inadvertently. We always do it deliberately. Indignation can underscore the intensity of feelings, but it really never persuades anyone. So that's an important insight, I think. And diplomats are sent abroad to advance our national interests, as I said, by persuading foreigners to do things that benefit us, not to act on the fantasies of domestic audiences or strike political poses that appeal to them. What's wrong with Chinese foreign policy right now is what is wrong also with a lot of American foreign policy is that we are basically striking poses rather than talking to the people we claim to be addressing. We're not empathetic on either side. And I learned that you can and should sustain personal friendships and cordial relationships with foreign counterparts, despite fundamental and often confrontational official interactions with them. So I used to go into the foreign ministry in Beijing and sit down with the vice foreign minister or assistant foreign minister that I was dealing with, and I would sprawl in those great overstuffed chairs that they have, and my counterpart would do likewise, and I would, say, "How did your kid do on that exam? Did you ever get to see that movie we talked about?" And so forth. And after about 5 minutes, I'd pull myself up straight, put my knees together, my hands on my knees, and I would say, I have been instructed by my government to protest in the very strongest terms the absolutely outrageous behavior of your government with regard to X, Y, or Z. And it is impossible to understand how any government claiming to be civilized could do the things that you are doing. Then my counterpart, of course, would say, I categorically reject everything you have said. It's all your fault, and so forth. And we would go on for a while and make sure that we conveyed our government's positions. And then we would look at each other and realize that we'd done our job and slouch back in the chairs. And I would say, or he would say, how about a picnic at the Bing Tombs this Sunday? You're up for that? I think compartmentalizing official interactions in a way that preserves friendship, cordiality is really important. And finally, I would say I learned to understand reasoning processes that people back home condemned as, quote, irrational, unquote. My experience, when you condemn something as irrational, all you're doing is saying that you're too lazy to try to understand it. I think you should always be willing to take the time to try to see things from the other side's perspective, however much you may disagree with it. And that's essential to effective diplomacy. So I guess I learned, a bunch of stuff, and what I've just said is far from exhaustive, but best I can do on the spur of the moment.